Kia ora and welcome to another episode of the Niggly Anish Cast. I am the Diggity Doodah Doc, as always, joined by the Wobbly Wildcard, and we are here to preview UFC 236. I believe it is in the ATL, Atlanta, Georgia, United States of America. Why is UFC 236 important, Wildcard? Because we've got this lad, we've got this Kiwi Nigerian monster, Israel Adesanya, fighting Kelvin Gastelum in the middleweight division for a interim title bout. And this is pretty much the biggest combat story out of Aotearoa right now, and we've got no shortage of those, Wildcard, considering that Joseph Parker's always in the mix of the heavyweight division, and pretty much everyone coming out of Auckland City kickboxing is doing good things, whether it's Israel Adesanya, you also have Shane Young, Kaikara France, and Dan Hooker in the mixed martial arts world, but a name that you might be familiar with, Wildcard, is Junior Fa.
Yeah.
Who is also a heavyweight boxer, but he trains out of Auckland City kickboxing.
Oh, well, there you go. Old Papakura's finest at the moment, Junior Fa.
How about that? Both of New Zealand's leading heavyweight boxing contenders. Where are they from, Wildcard?
Oh, South Auckland, mate.
Only place to be if you're a budding Kiwi athlete. We just churn them out. Adesanya UFC 236 Wildcard. What do you know, and what are you hoping to find out from this episode of the Niche Cast?
Oh, hoping to find out relatively enormous quantities of good information on the fella. He's fast rising as one of these, like, just I don't know. He's not obviously in the Stephen Adams Lydia Ko sort of upper tier quite yet, but he's certainly on his way up there as a Kiwi sporting icon. Break it down how we got to this point. Like, tell me the journey. What's the story of Israel Adesanya?
The hard and fast version of that story that kind of puts it all into perspective is that Israel Adesanya has had 5 or 6 fights in the past 12 to 14 months in the UFC. So he had his first fight like 14 months ago in the UFC, and now he is here fighting for the interim title. So you've got that aspect, which is a meteoric rise through the middleweight division in the UFC. But prior to that, and maybe you mentioned that he's not quite in that echelon of Lydia Ko, Stephen Adams. You could put him in that echelon because of the caliber of his kickboxing career prior to entry in the UFC. Like, he was one of the world's best kickboxers, and so he's been operating at a world-class level for a long time now, and now he's just translated that into the UFC. He also... he's been on the fight circuit for so long. He had he is a King of the Ring champion, but he also, in one of those boxing events where you have a couple of fights a night or something like that, he fought someone that Joseph Parker had fought. Well, it might have been like Brian Minto.
Yeah, that's the name, yeah.
It's just whether Adesanya fought him, but he's fought someone that Joseph Parker has fought in a heavyweight boxing fight bout, which is pretty ludicrous.
Did he fight him as a kickboxer?
No, as a boxer.
As a boxer, right. Okay,
Like,
well, that's impressive.
He has won professional boxing fights as well, which is testament to his quality. And now he's kind of got eased into the UFC, a couple of easier fights, and as you progress in the UFC, you get better opposition. If you stand up to the level of that of the opponent, and you dismantle them how Adesanya has dismantled his opponents, you're just shooting straight to the top. But it's not a case of Israel Adesanya coming out of nowhere. Like, he was very much a world-class fighter who then entered the UFC, and you don't really see it from the kickboxing side of things. You see it from, usually you see it from a wrestling or jiu-jitsu side, where a lot of guys are world-class jiu-jitsu players, they're world-class wrestlers, and then they come into UFC because those core fundamentals translate extremely well into UFC mixed martial arts success, and the UFC is the biggest, best place to do so right now. And whereas Israel Adesanya's got the kickboxing, the striking background, world-class kickboxer who comes into the UFC, and he's torn through everyone, and now he comes up against Kelvin Gastelum for the interim title bout, because Robert Whittaker was due to fight Kelvin Gastelum in Australia. Robert Whittaker got really sick and he couldn't fight in that bout, and so this fight is for the interim title, but it's also to see who's going to fight Robert Whittaker to be the ultimate middleweight champion at the moment.
So he would fight, if he wins this, he would fight Robert Whittaker next. Is that what you're saying? For the title?
Yeah, and it's one thing to say it's a big fight just because titles are on the line, but it is so much bigger when you consider that Israel Adesanya versus Robert Whittaker, which will probably happen in Australia just because they could make so much more money in Australia. It would be pretty crazy if it was in Auckland, but to have Israel Adesanya fighting Robert Whittaker in Australia, believe me, 3,000% wildcard. New Zealand and Australia would not have seen anything like it, and it would put... There's a possibility it could be on that kind of Jeff Horn, Manny Pacquiao level, and it would far surpass anything that Joseph Parker has done in New Zealand, that's for sure, and it would just be a ludicrous moment for mixed martial arts and combat sports in Australasia to have Robert Whittaker representing Australia pretty much, and then Israel Adesanya representing Aotearoa in Nigeria. It's a weird thing because Israel Adesanya is very proud of his Nigerian roots and heritage, so he's like a Kiwi Nigerian, and then Robert Whittaker, he's pretty much an Australian who, like, he plays up the being from New Zealand aspect as well, and we play it up as well because he was born here, he's got Māori heritage, it's a beautiful thing, but neither of them are like 3,000%, again, I don't know why I keep saying 3,000%, but neither of them are full hundies repping Aotearoa, which is an odd thing. Like, they very much represent Aotearoa to the best of their abilities, but not to the like extent where you've got Kaikara France or Shane Young doing a pukana or being like strictly fighting out in New Zealand. It's just a weird thing. The two best fighters both have kind of like a dual situation. That's just a very weird thought off the top of my head.
Well, there's plenty of that goes around. Like in all sports, it's pretty rare that you get someone just like singularly focused on a country. I mean, with team sports make that more of a like a focus when you have to represent not just a single country, but you represent a country like with all your mates in that team, and it's just more of a like thing. But you know, it's like when people say that Stephen Adams not playing for the Tall Blacks makes him like less of a proud New Zealander, which is just the most outrageous thing people could say. On that note, what's Adesanya's like? What's his profile like in the States at the moment? Like, is he a known name all the way through the sport at this point?
Through the sport, yeah, because everyone can see that he is an extremely talented fighter. Like and everyone, there was a wave when Conor McGregor was coming through where each opponent he'd just step up and win, and you felt like you were witnessing the rise of someone. And that's pretty much what's happened with Israel Adesanya. Everyone's kind of followed him. There was buzz around his entry into the UFC, and every moment he's fought, he's ticked all the boxes. And like, he's just coming off a win against Anderson Silva, who many consider the greatest mixed martial arts fighter ever. And Adesanya beat Silva reasonably comfortably. Silva's he's near the end of his career, so there is a bit of an asterisk, but Anderson Silva is the most recognizable fighter ever, really, and Adesanya beat him, fairly easily. So that kind of blew Adesanya up to a different level. But Kelvin Gastelum is the biggest challenge, skill-wise, for Adesanya to kind of seal his spot in the UFC and in the world pantheon of fighting.
And this fight's in Atlanta too, so that's probably only going to be even more of a magnifying glass for the entire sort of UFC community. Because I remember the reason I ask is because I remember as Joseph Parker was coming up, and you had, first of all, just no one cared in America or in Britain, which are at the moment the two sort of powerhouses of boxing, and you just had this point where once he got sort of linked with these top fighters and he started fighting some of them, you had people who knew his name but didn't really know what he was about as a fighter yet. And he hasn't fought a major fight in America. He has fought in America, but nothing that's got anyone's eyes open. He's fought in Britain a few times, but he's lost 2 of those fights. So I think he's become underrated in that part of the world just because he's lost to 2 of the one of the definite 2 top candidates in the planet, and then another one who's Dillian Whyte, 4th or 5th probably in the rankings. So that sort of swept him under the radar. But Adesanya, I mean, he's winning. He's winning fights. He's rising up the ranks, and I got to assume on the weekend, if he wins again, then he's probably going to get himself a fair bit of buzz going down for the for what is to come next. But I'm getting ahead of myself there. What are the with this fight? Let's talk matchups. Let's talk stylistic clash. What he's got to do to win. How this fight is gonna be undertaken. What it's gonna look like. All those little the fascinating wrinkles that the people want to hear about.
Lovely, but just a few notes on the comparison of Parker. Adesanya has already been on the Joe Rogan podcast.
No, I haven't heard Joseph Parker there.
Adesanya was on the Joe Rogan podcast last year, so before fighting Anderson Silva, which pretty much tells you all you need to know about Adesanya as a fighter, and the standing as a fighter he has in the community and around the world. And the other factor is that Adesanya he's had 5-6 fights in the past year, and he's won them all, which means that you're just snowballing momentum. And whereas the boxing is a bit more stop-start, you don't quite get that frequency and fluidity that Adesanya is getting. Compared to Robert Whittaker's had very few fights in the last year, maybe 2 years. So it's not a boxing versus mixed martial arts thing, but Adesanya is very unique in that he's got that fluidity, he's got that snowball effect happening at the moment, which is in his favor. In terms of a matchup style-wise, Adesanya is definitely a striker. But to be a striker at this level, you need to have very good takedown defense. So you need to keep the fight standing up. And Adesanya has shown there are 2 fights against notable wrestlers One was Brad Tavares, the other was Derek Brunson, and Adesanya just was like a wizard defensively in avoiding takedowns and keeping the fight standing. And if you want to strike with Adesanya, he is going to fuck you up. He's got such an arsenal. He might not have like the straight up power, but he's got such an arsenal and variety and precision with his striking that if you stand in front of Adesanya and you allow him to settle into the variety of strikes and his movement and the weird things he can do, like in terms of there's far better people like me, like guys like Luke Thomas who break down Adesanya's fighting. It's the creativity that is important and how Adesanya can defeat guys or strike guys at different times, off balance, with different footwork than you're used to from different areas. All of that just creates one of the world-class strikers, one of the best strikers perhaps we've ever seen in the UFC. And now he comes up against Kelvin Gastelum, who has power. So if Gastelum can hit Adesanya, it's going to be interesting because Gastelum has the power to make it interesting. But Gastelum he's also got that wrestling background, and he's from the same camp as Henry Cejudo, who is the I think it's flyweight, one of the lower, like the really small jokers. He's just won a couple of bouts, I think, down there, but he's an Olympic wrestler, and he's very close with Kelvin Gastelum, and Kelvin Gastelum has that wrestling ability, but he also has just straight up power in his hands. So it's going to be a case of Adesanya of snuffing the takedowns, avoiding the takedowns, being really slick defensively, and it's going to be very difficult for Gastelum to actually hit Adesanya. And Gastelum's much shorter. He's like a more short and stocky type of dude, whereas Adesanya is long and lanky. And so, like, it was weird. They do like a pre-fight workout, open workout for fans to see. And some fighters, I think like John Jones recently brought out all his coaching staff and literally just introduced his coaching staff to the fans. Other fighters, bring out their children and just have a little muck around. Some fighters, and then other fighters, like, use it as an acrobat show. It's pretty much open to do whatever you want to do. And Israel Adesanya, like, in a weird way, he showcased his jab. Like, he made a point of showcasing his jab, whether that is to kind of allude to what might happen, or whether it's just a tactic to throw Gastelum off to expect the jab. But it was just an interesting situation because you would expect Adesanya with the bigger reach, the bigger body, longer limbs. If he can just keep Gastelum at a distance, jab him up, get a few kicks in to maintain the distance, control the distance, Kelvin Gastelum's not going to be able to hit him because he's short, he's got less reach, and Kelvin Gastelum is not going to be able to take him down. So my thing would be to watch out how Adesanya controls the distance between him and Gastelum with the jab, but also with kicks. Because if he can keep touching, keep hurting Gastelum from a distance, which is very much a strong possibility given Adesanya's striking ability, it's hard to see how Gastelum wins that fight.
Is that sort of like the general worldwide consensus? Adesanya is the favorite going in against Gastelum, or is it, more of a toss of a coin sort of thing? Like, what's the perception globally here?
I think it's a bit more even because a lot of people aren't quite as like fanboy-ish about Adesanya that I am.
Yeah, sure.
Because obviously I've got the Kiwi bias, so I just can't see Adesanya losing to anyone, even Rob Whittaker. Like, I think Adesanya would give him a really interesting fight. So everyone is referring to Gastelum's power. And that if Gastelum hits Adesanya, that could finish the fight right then. So, but for me, from my biased perspective, it's difficult for me to see Gastelum actually hitting Adesanya. So that's where I settle.
Oh, well, there you go then. I've run out of questions to ask. Is there anything else to run through?
If you are a fight fan, this is a very the top of this card with Israel Adesanya versus Kelvin Gastelum and Max Holloway fighting Dustin Poirier is like a beautiful thing for mixed martial arts. Max Holloway is an absolute wizard in the octagon. He's a master. He's among the best fighters in any division in the world. And then you've got Israel Adesanya. So if you do love a bit of fighting, if you do love mixed martial arts or boxing, make an effort to watch these top two fights because it's just striking at the highest level. Like Max Holloway, Dustin Poirier, they are there to strike you. Gastelum's got the power. Israel Adesanya is arguably one of the best strikers in the world. So it's just a strike fest, and it's going to be a beautiful thing for fighting.
A beautiful thing. Well, that's me sold then, Doc.
Lovely jubbly. Kia kaha. E tu. E noho. E noho and listen to the Nishcast maybe. Or kia e tu and go for a walk and listen to the Nishcast. However you get your fix. Enjoy it.